America asks its citizens to go to dangerous places and to do difficult things. These are people who are in the military, who are in the clandestine services, who are diplomats, and they go willingly, and they go acknowledging that there is a risk, but the understanding that they carry with them is if they end up in harm's way, historically they have rest assured that their country will do everything it can do to rescue them. That's not a guarantee. And the people that go and they accept these assignments voluntarily, they know that there's an inherent risk, but the understanding is that their nation will move heaven and earth to save them. And that didn't happen. And 4 people were murdered.
Really?
That's the scandal of Benghazi. The thing that I take away, and it's been mentioned by previous speakers, is this jarring contrast between the ingenuity and the heroism and the initiative that was taking place at Benghazi. You can read these communications, you can understand the urgency of what they were dealing with and this overwhelming sense of responsibility to rescue other Americans. Meanwhile, across the ocean, almost a disposition of near fecklessness. The summary of this White House meeting that the chairman mentioned that took place at 7:30, half of the discussion of that meeting, half of the readouts, according to the information that we became privy to, suggested that they were talking about a video. When you read this information, you come to the conclusion, at least I did, that they're as concerned, actually more concerned, about whether they're going to be offending the Libyan government by how it is that this rescue is proposed to take place than whether the rescue is actually successful. Marinate in that for a second. They're worried about approvals. They're worried about how this will come off. It's very clear that they were very worried previous to that about the notion of pulling back from Benghazi. That's what the testimony shows, because an early exit from Benghazi would have done what? It would have maybe upset the Libyans. It's outrageous. Ambassador Chris Stevens, before he's the ambassador, when he's the envoy, he goes and he lands with no diplomatic immunity. He's on his own. It was a White House policy of no boots on the ground that deprived him of military support that was previously going to accompany him, yet he goes in alone. It's a foreshadowing of things to come. So I think we've got to also look at this notion of responsibility. There's been a lot of discussion, obviously, about Secretary Clinton. At the end of August, we learned, before the attack, Secretary Clinton approved a $20 million grant global security contingency fund to who? To the Libyans. But this was the same State Department that basically stiff-armed one request after another request, cascading requests, cumulative requests, requests for security and more support that were essentially rejected, ignored, put somewhere else. So here's what's in it for us. Here's what we have to recognize. If we are going to ask Americans to put themselves at risk in the future, we've got to remedy this, all of us. America needs to have a reputation with people who are serving America, that America will follow its end of the bargain. And America, that is, the bureaucrats in Washington, failed this miserably.
"56 days. You cannot begin to understand and place all the facts that this committee has worked diligently for a year and a half to present to the American people, without understanding that this took place 56 days before a contested political election for President of the United States. Whether it was the failure to put adequate security on the ground, whether it was the dithering while Americans were at risk that night, or whether it is the continued story, in spite of enormous evidence to the contrary, about a YouTube video, it all takes place against a political backdrop. And you don't have to take my word for that. You can read the emails themselves. Before the last mortar falls, they're talking about politics. As they're debating whether or not to send additional security to Libya, the concerns are about the Libyan government, not about the Americans who were on the ground that night. I sit on the Intelligence Committee. I come at this from that perspective. When you read what the intelligence was the night of the attack from Benghazi, Libya, It is uniform and uncontroverted. This was attack by radical Islamic terrorists on an American facility. There was no fog of war. There was no dispute, save for a few stray news reports. The evidence was very clear. Go read what Secretary Clinton herself said. Go read the words from other officials who were on the ground that night, communicating back to the most senior levels of government what had transpired that night. It wasn't about a YouTube video. It wasn't about a bunch of folks out for a walk. And when Secretary Clinton said, "What difference does it make?" We can now, as a result of our work over the last year and a half, tell you exactly what difference it makes. It makes a difference in how you respond to an attack. Whether you think this was just a bunch of folks walking around or a continuous 5-phase assault on America that took place in Benghazi, Libya that night. Washington, D.C. somehow viewed this as having ended once our men and women were evacuated to the annex in Benghazi. I can assure you, when you read the timeline of events, the men on the ground that night understood this wasn't over. They understood that terror was still upon them, that the risk to their lives continued. And in Washington, D.C., we debated things that had nothing to do with whether or not we had aircraft en route to Benghazi, Libya. That's what difference it makes. You can't begin to exercise the leadership you need to exercise if you don't understand what's happening on the ground, and if you choose to put political expediency and politics ahead of the men and women on the ground. For that, you'll have to answer to yourself. I find it morally reprehensible and behavior that if it was your son or your daughter or one of your family members or friends who were on the ground that night and you watch the actions in Washington, D.C., you'd have every right to be disgusted with the response from the senior American leaders. This was a failure at the most senior levels of our government, and one that I hope the recommendations this committee presents will help making sure that something like this never happens again.
Let me start by saying I am so proud of this report. I am so proud of the work that this committee has done as a whole, the majority. I want to thank our Chairman Gowdy and the rest of the members of this committee for the way in which this investigation was handled and for his leadership as our chairman. This investigation has uncovered a ton of new information, which leads to our much greater understanding about what happened before, during, and after the attack in Benghazi. While our guys were on the ground, taking gunfire and mortar attacks, Washington was moving at a snail's pace. In Washington, the administration was more concerned about diplomatic sensitivities with the Libyans and promoting its policy as successful than it was about the American safety that they sent to Benghazi. At the end of the day, no military assets were ever moving toward Benghazi. The bottom line is that Washington failed to have our guys' backs when they needed it. And from my perspective, this represents incompetence or indifference or both. As we know now, but for the bravery of a few Americans and the unexpected response of Gaddafi's underground militia, there would have been an even greater loss of life that night. In this case, I believe that the government failed its people and lied to the public in the aftermath. This is unacceptable. And I hope and I know that this report shines light on that, and God willing, will prevent this from ever happening again.
I too want to join Martha in thanking our chairman. This has been an incredible task to undertake. And we have worked day in and day out, particularly the staff, to come up with the truth, to bring facts to the American people that we did not know before. I've been particularly focused on issues prior to the attack. And the things that we learned about Benghazi, there were many new things that we learned about Benghazi. Things, and we've all admitted, and it's been known for some time, that the security was inadequate. But what we didn't know until this investigation was that the State Department made a conscious decision to keep the Benghazi compound off the radar. and not provide it the security that it needed. In fact, none of the facilities in Libya met any of the security requirements required by the State Department and required by law. And so when Chris Stevens was sent into Benghazi, he was initially going in with the military. But because of the president's policy of no boots on the ground, at the last minute, that military support was pulled. So we know he didn't have, and the mission didn't have enough security, whether it was people or whether it was physical security tools. But he had a mission, and he had a mission to ensure that Benghazi became a permanent post at some point, because it was the individuals in Benghazi that had helped lead the mission to topple Gaddafi. And so the administration and the Clinton administration and Secretary of State, they wanted to show Benghazi how important they were. They wanted to show Benghazi that they would be there for them. The Americans would not leave. And we learned during this investigation that it was in October of 2012 that the secretary had a planned trip to Benghazi. She had planned the trip to Libya in order to show the Libyans that the Americans had been there for them and that the Americans under her leadership had led the charge. Well, I will tell you, this was failed American foreign policy. It was failed American foreign policy from the beginning. And that is because we learned, and as the president has even said, the worst thing that we did was not planning for the day after. He's indicated the worst mistake of his presidency was not planning for the day after Gaddafi fell. And so we sent people, American diplomats, to Benghazi, to Libya, to a failed state. And what they were most concerned about at the beginning of going into Libya was making sure that it wasn't a failed state, that it wasn't a terrorist safe haven. And what is it today? It's a terrorist safe haven. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, other militias are there, controlling their only natural resources of oil and other places in Libya. It is failed policy. We failed these American people. But I want to close by making sure people realize we said that we were going to try to make sure this didn't happen in the future. So not only did this committee work hard to uncover the facts and to uncover the truth and to put light on the truth, but we have pages of recommendations, many pages of recommendations. And I would encourage you to please look at those recommendations. And just a couple of the recommendations that are so critical is that our government agencies and the leaders of those government agencies had not planned for an attack like this. CIA, Defense Department, State Department had not been prepared and had really no plans in place to execute something like this that could happen on, of all days, September 11th. Even though the president had called a meeting of top government officials asking if we were ready for September 11th. And while leaders said we were ready, we were not ready. We were not prepared to respond. We also learned that political operatives got involved in messaging after this incident occurred. That should not be happening. Internal and public government communications about terrorist attacks should not be taking place. Government should be telling the American people the truth, not trying to put political spin. And so we have many recommendations that we hope and that we will encourage our members of Congress as well as administrations to look at, to change their policies, to change our laws, to find more funding mechanisms, to make sure that our people are protected in the future. And with that, I yield back to the chairman.
If you have questions, please identify yourself, the entity for whom you work, and the member to whom the question is directed. Yes, ma'am.
Chairman, the Democrats on the committee say that you put out a lot of new details, but that they don't really change the fundamental understanding of what happened, and a lot of the broad themes that you've just discussed have been known for years. So at the end of the day, was this the best use of taxpayer dollars and of your time?
It is difficult for me to begin with where I disagree with the foundation of your question, so let me just start at the end of it. Who says that stuff was new? Nobody has ever reported that nothing was headed to Benghazi. Nobody's ever reported that not a single wheel was turning towards Libya. God knows nobody's ever reported who actually evacuated our folks. You may have reported that Secretary Clinton was headed back to Libya in October, but you didn't have the corroboration of the emails, and you didn't know why she was going back. You didn't know about the $20 million memo. First of all, you didn't know about any of the emails from Ambassador Stevens. You didn't know about any of the emails from Sidney Blumenthal to whomever he was emailing. You didn't know that a single U.S. military asset did not meet a single designated timeline. Think about that for a second. The world's most powerful military did not meet a single solitary self-imposed timeline. So all of that is new. As for the Democrats, color me shocked that they are critical of our report. All 5 of them voted not to form the committee. They threatened not to participate, and for the most part, they did not. They have been serial leakers of information, and they missed a really good opportunity. I don't know if you've had a chance to read the report or not, but if you read the report, you will see their report mentions her name far more times than our report does. Our report doesn't mention the presumptive Republican nominee for president because he's got nothing to do with Benghazi. So you can direct those questions to Elijah and the rest of them. I'm actually proud of what we found, and I think it's new.
Are you saying that the military could have saved those 4 people if they had done more?
Well, clearly you couldn't have saved 2 of them. They were dead within about 15 minutes of the fire being started. With respect to Glenn Doherty and Ty Woods, there were 3 assets that made it there. The group from Tripoli that deployed itself, an unarmed drone that was elsewhere and positioned over the facility, and then another unarmed drone that let's just say the evidence is split on whether or not it could have been armed in time. It got there before the mortar attack. So I don't know. I'm not going to make a reckless allegation that Ty Woods and Glenn Doherty's lives could have been saved. What I am going to tell you is if the mortar had happened at 7:15 or 9:15 or 11:15, the result would have been the same. Nothing was ever coming to Benghazi. So I think that's a fundamentally important question to ask. There's an email that sticks out of my mind right now that's a takeout from the Civets, from the White House meeting, which, by the way, if you know about it, nobody reported on it. So to the Democrats claim that there's no new information, I haven't heard much about this White House meeting until our report was issued. One of the takeouts from that to our White House meeting, in addition to the 5 action items on the video, consider this. The video had been out for a while. It wasn't new. Cairo had happened. Right? Cairo happened before Benghazi. So if you are concerned about this video, you have done absolutely nothing after you received notice that the video is going to be disseminated. You have done absolutely nothing after Cairo happened. Okay? You with me? Cairo has happened, and you have changed not one iota your military posture. But yet, when the attack in Benghazi happens, which is unconnected with the video, 50% of your action items coming out of a Civets relate to the video.
Chairman Gavin?
Yeah. Hang on a second, Luke. Yes, Chad.
Days before the election. When we've talked to members of the committee and read through the report here, there are different lanes that deal with Secretary Clinton, defense, so on and so forth. But there are folks who are going to read this report and say this is just a part to go get Hillary Clinton 130 days before the election and about 27 days before the convention. How do you, regardless of what's in the report, but that's going to be the criticism, how do you deflect that when people say this, some of you said, well, this demonstrated, incompetence at the highest levels. How do you not get that perceived as something that's political?
Read it for yourself, Chad. Read the report for yourself. If you can read this report and you believe on the last page of the report that it is about one person instead of about 4 people, then there's nothing I can say that's going to disabuse you of that. That's just what you believe. And there's no amount of facts and no amount of evidence that is going to dissuade you from your previously held conviction. Nancy asked about the Democrats. The Democrats' mantra all along has been that there was no new information. Well, there's undisputably no new information. So now their position is, but it doesn't fundamentally change the way we view Benghazi. Yeah, if who evacuated your folks, does not fundamentally change the way you view Benghazi, if the fact that no asset was ever headed towards the place that actually had a crisis, this email that we need to plan in case a crisis emerges, this is what came out of the civets. We need to have a plan in case the crisis expands and a real threat emerges. What the hell was going on in Benghazi? Was that not a real crisis? Was that not a real threat that had emerged? So I can't do anything to disabuse what Elijah thinks. He's not my audience. My audience are reasonable, fair-minded Americans who want to know what happened to four of their fellow citizens, and I think they can draw their own conclusion. Yeah.
On that point, you said Representative Pompeo, quoting Hillary Clinton, "What difference does it make?" saying that you can't be a leader if you don't know what's going on the ground, and then saying that she was morally reprehensible for the leadership that she employed that evening.
Well, I'm going to let him address it. I don't think you'll see any of that in the report. Is it in the report?
But he's promoting it right now.
And you know what? You're going to write a story about your takeaway from the report. I stand on our report. How my fellow citizens, including my committee members, read the report. How you read the report. What story you do on the report. The report. You read the report. You will not see any of those quotes in the report.
Mr. Pompeo addressed that. Is Hillary Clinton's leadership morally reprehensible?
Yes.
It is.
Absolutely. But let me be clear about what we're doing and what we did. I remember the day. None of us volunteered for this assignment, I can assure you. We were all asked to undertake this mission, and the mission was very clear. We sat in a room. I remember it like it was yesterday. And we all looked each other in the eye and we said, this day, the day we're standing here today will come. And what we want to be able to tell each other is that we worked our tails off. I got the polite word out. We worked our tails off to develop every fact we could, to tell the American people everything we could possibly glean. And we have been obstructed every step along the way in that effort, including by the very Democrats today who are calling us political. Go read these transcripts. Go look who called the witness. Go look who asked the questions. This is not the first congressional inquiry in the history of America. I dare you to go find another congressional inquiry where one party behaved in a way that was so deeply obstructive of getting the American people the facts that they needed. With respect to my statements about Secretary Clinton, I believe them in my heart. The reason Representative Jordan and I chose to write a separate report is that we felt that we had delivered an important work in the committee's tally of the information that was available. We also are asking every one of you to go develop your conclusions about what took place. I've been knee-deep in this for over 2 years. So has Representative Jordan on previous committees as well. And we feel like it's incredibly important to highlight the conclusions that Representative Jordan and I draw about the facts. Read the facts, read the reports. I think you'll see that the conclusions that we draw are real and accurate and fair.
Yeah, can I ask the flip side of that? The flip side of that could be that because you chose not to draw conclusions, does that suggest that you don't have the goods on placing any blame on the administration? Specifically the woman who wants to be
Dana, shockingly, that was not what the House asked me to do. Look at the resolution. The resolution doesn't mention Secretary Clinton. Speaker Boehner nor Speaker Ryan have ever asked me to do anything about 2016 presidential politics. Speaker Boehner asked me to find out what happened to four of our fellow citizens, and I believe that that is what I have done. You are welcome to read the report. I hope you will. I know you will. If you, at the end of reading that report, can conclude that it is about one person instead of about four people, I will be shocked.
I'm asking the opposite question. Do you believe, after doing this for 2 years, spending all of your time and millions of dollars, do you believe that based on this, that the American people should look at this and see that the woman who wants to be president has culpability?
I was with you until the last clause of your statement. I think the American people ought to look at it. They ought to look at it because fellow Americans died and fellow Americans were injured and fellow Americans went to heroic lengths to save other Americans. What conclusions they draw after reading it is up to them. I wrote the report that I think is centered in the facts. I have a background of who, what, when, where. I don't have a background in the why. Y'all may have a background in the why. I don't. My job is to report facts. That's what I've done. You can draw whatever conclusions you want to draw. Yes, ma'am.
Who is tapping the brakes on the military response? And my second question is, what did you learn about a covert weapons operation in Benghazi?
Catherine, we asked questions about covert weapons operations. We made some progress. The lawyers intervened when we were beginning to make a lot of progress. And among the questions I asked the president included that one specifically. I have not heard back from him yet. Heard from his lawyer, and I'm not holding my breath, but I'm going to get an answer to that. I think it was important because the House asked us to examine policies that could have led to the attack. So I think it's important to ask the questions, but that's not the focus of our committee. So, well, tapping the brakes is a pejorative phrase, and I remember when we said we were going to interview Carter Ham again, I remember a lot of raised eyebrows. Why are you going to talk to him again? As if all the right questions had been asked the first time. I think the military leaders would tell you exactly what I said in my opening. They believed that an evacuation was imminent. When you question them on why they believed an evacuation was imminent, the answers do not withstand even the mildest level of scrutiny. You have real live witnesses that can tell you what is going on. If you think the fighting has subsided, why don't you talk to the real live witnesses that are being shot at? If you really believe an evacuation is imminent, at some level, you're going to have to ask, how is that evacuation going to be effectuated? Because you don't have the proper vehicles to take them from the annex to the Benghazi airport. And the only plane you have is one that you privately commissioned. It's not even a U.S. aircraft, and you have no idea whether it's going to hold everybody. So how are you going to evacuate in the midst of a firefight? General Ham did not even know our guys were ambushed from the compound to the annex. He didn't even know about it. So to everyone who wanted to know why we wanted to talk to General Ham again, I thought it'd be nice for General Ham to have access to all the facts, because he did not have them the night he made the decisions. Yes.
So some would describe this as a perfect storm of bureaucratic inertia. Obviously, your report alleges blame on many levels, but I'm curious, is there one entity or one person to whom you lay most of the blame after all of this analysis?
That's going to be in the eyes of my fellow citizens. I'm not in the business of apportioning culpability. I think that there's enough to go around, just like there's enough urgency and ingenuity and valor. That really is my takeaway. And maybe it's because I have talked to the families of the four, some of the families of the four in the last couple of days. But when you do what I used to do for a living, you ask the families, what is it that you would like to see done? And I am at peace that we did exactly for the families what we said we would do. It just took longer, but we did what we said we would do. I wanted to be able to tell Ty Wood's widow the truth about the military response. I wanted to be able to tell Sean Smith's mother the truth about the security leading up to it. And I am at peace that we have more information than the other committees had, and we could have had more had we had just a tiny bit of cooperation from the other side. Yes.
Along those lines in a way, put aside the attack itself and what happened that particular night, have you been able to, in some way, some abstract way, I guess, get into Ambassador Stevens' mind regarding the U.S. presence in Libya, how he wanted that consulate and the facilities there in Benghazi, how much he wanted the American presence to not appear militarized?
Well, let's be very clear about something. Chris Stevens loved the people of Libya, and in particular, he loved the people of Benghazi. And the heroism he showed going in as the envoy, and what he had to deal with as the envoy, well before he was ever the ambassador, is a level of valor and heroism and commitment to this country that if you don't read the report for any other reason, read it to see what Chris Stevens had to endure in 2011. Now, you asked me, did we have an insight to his mindset? Yeah. He got there on September the 10th. He started meeting with intelligence officials about the state of security in Libya, and he began to postpone his subsequent meetings because what he was hearing. He knew it wasn't great. He had no idea how bad it was. So he began to postpone, the next meeting is ready, the next meeting is ready, and here's our ambassador saying, I'm not through getting my debriefing yet. And then he moves the off-campus meetings and engagements on campus. And then you see his diary entry. You see his diary entry on September the 11th? Read his diary entry. Read the email that he sent to the British diplomat. No, we know exactly what was on Chris Stevens' mind. Benghazi had deteriorated in a way that he did not even expect, and security was what was on his mind.
The United States presence there was not solidified by a significant...
I think he wanted to stay alive more than anything else. With all due respect, I think he wanted to stay alive. And if that means a slightly higher footprint, then there need to be experts or supervisors in your life that say, we appreciate your valor, but we're going to give you the security that you asked for originally. Yes.
So people have kind of asked a version of this question in different ways, but
you must not like my answer.
Americans have viewed these events and all of these investigations through certain lenses, and they're probably going to continue after today, despite your pleas that they read 800 pages of a report. There are bumper stickers and T-shirts all over this country that say, Hillary Clinton lied, people died. Maybe Mr. Pompeo would answer this too. Is that true?
You don't see that T-shirt on me, and you've never seen that bumper sticker on any of my vehicles, and you've never heard me comment on that. Have you read it?
Well, I'm asking you.
Well, I'm asking you to read it. I'm asking you to read it. I'm not going to tell you what to be on the lookout for. I'm going to tell you there's new information, and it fundamentally changes the way I view what happened before, during, and after. But who was it? Ben Rhodes that said reporters literally know nothing. Was that right? Is that what Ben Rhodes said? I don't believe that. I actually trust you to read the report for yourself and draw your own conclusion. You're going to write your report.
Yes, but so what do you think she lied?
I'm not going to assign. That's a word you couldn't use in a courtroom. I know this. I want you to contrast the information and the evidence that was available on the evening of September the 11th. Look at the full body of evidence that was available, and then look at what was said. And then you draw your own conclusion of whether or not you made the best use of the evidence and the information that was available. It is one thing to say the evidence didn't exist. It existed. We found them. We found the DS agents. We found the GRS agents. Their conversations ongoing throughout the night. She actually talked to Greg Hicks. So that argument actually works both ways. If there's a failure of information, she was fairly definitive in certain statements she made to other people privately. There was no ambiguity. It wasn't like, I can't answer that question, Mr. Egyptian political leader, we don't know. She was pretty definitive. It was just in the public statements to us that there was less definitiveness. So you're going to have to decide that for yourself.
Yeah, I would just pick up right where the chairman was. Look at the statements made privately. You decide for yourself what she said privately, what others said in the administration said privately, what they said publicly. Some have said, well, the intelligence analysis changed over time. That's true. But their statements didn't. They were consistent. Publicly, it's a video-inspired protest. Privately, terrorist attack. That continued. So look for yourself. You can decide. But when you look at the private statements compared to what they told the American people, a stark contrast, a dramatic difference, and look for yourself.
Let me just say that this report has never been about one person. It's been about the 4 Americans and what the other Americans inside of Libya did to save their colleagues. The media wants to make this about one person. The Democrats want to make this about one person. That's never been our intention. But we have enough facts in the report that I think every American can make their own mind up. If you talk to Ty Wood's dad, he's going to have a different opinion from reading the report of what the secretary told him and what the facts say in the report. Sean Smith's mother is probably going to have that same different way of looking at the report. So I think each American needs to read this report. It's lengthy, but it had to be lengthy so we could spell out what the truth is and what these new facts have given light to. But this report, and I promise you, the chairman has made this very clear to each and every one of us, this was not about one single person. And in fact, the report, I think, we reached our goal when we came up with the different recommendations that need to be done to prevent this from happening again. And I think the detail that we went into makes these recommendations all the more important. And hopefully the speaker and other people will take them and do something with them. Because I do think they lay out a means of us not getting in this same situation. I would like to comment too, that when these Americans arrived from Tripoli to the airport in Benghazi, they were there for about 3 hours. And so I don't think we knew if we had another hostage situation at the airport or not. But as it's been said by the other members, not one wheel had been up, not one person headed to Benghazi, and we didn't really know how those guys, if they were going to even be allowed to leave the airport. So there were many other situations that should have been talked about at different times in Washington that were never talked about. Do we have another hostage situation? Is the ambassador hostage? Are these military guys and other GRS, are they being held hostage? We didn't see any evidence of that ever being talked about while these guys are standing there trying to talk their way off that airport to get to help their friends.
Well, I haven't gotten a question yet, although the last one may be about the latter part of what I call Section 2, which is the post-attack communication. I want to pivot for just a second away from the person you're asking me about to the person the administration actually put on the 5 Sunday talk shows. We talked to her, and I appreciate Mr. Eggleston making her available. I found that interview to be very informative. She was the third choice. I thought she was inadequately prepared, and that's what happens when you are inadequately prepared. You say a series of demonstrably false things on national television, including about the FBI, including conflating the video with the demonstration, including saying that a handful of extremists hijacked and otherwise. This is just stuff that's made up. It'd be one thing if it were in the talking points. There are multiple sets of talking points, Hipsy talking points. It'd be one thing if it were in there and they got it wrong, therefore she got it wrong. It's not even in there. It's just made up out of whole cloth. So I get that that's not the person I have been asked about, but this is the person who made most of the public pronouncements, at least on that Sunday after the attack. I was told one more question. Yes, sir.
You back to the specifics of the Marine Fast Team. Do you actually name in the report the officers who told them to get off the plane and change into civilian uniforms? Do you name names of those kinds of details?
No, sir.
And follow-up is...
do we name the details or the names?
Of the actual names of people who gave orders.
We tried to honor DOD's request with respect to how high up you are before your name is used publicly, as opposed to using the names of people who, we try to be sensitive to that, frankly, across all agencies. I don't think you're going to see the names of the people. You'll see the title. You'll be able to read the transcript if we can ever get the transcripts clear. And more importantly, you'll be able to see the underlying data. And that to me is what's important. You may read an email from Ambassador Mull. You may read it differently than the way I read it. I don't know how you could, but you might. I want you to be able to read the email. I want you to be able to see what Pat Kennedy said during the firefight. I don't want you to take my word for it. but I need a little bit of help from the administration to clear the underlying data and the transcripts. I don't think this is lost on y'all. I really don't. I think y'all know all of the transcripts that I can make publicly available are going to be made publicly available. I don't think it's fair to piecemeal them out, but I think they ought to be made publicly available, and you ought to look at the underlying data, and then you can decide whether or not the report fairly addresses the testimony of witness X. If you read the transcript and you say that's in context, yeah, I'll give them a check mark, or that's not in context. I don't want you taking my word for anything. I want you reading it for yourself.
Mr. Chairman, Charles Woods has asked the president publicly if the drone witnessed the death of his son. Do you know if the drone captured that and it was fed to the White House?
I know that the drone was in place at the time of the mortar attacks. I do not know the degree of granularity and particularity that the drone video footage has. But you raise an interesting point. When you meet with the families privately, you hear questions that you would never hear in a press conference. They're incredibly personal questions. Because while these are four fellow Americans to us, they are sons and husbands and brothers to the people that we talked to at the very beginning and the last group that I talked to, which are the family. The questions are very, very different. And even though it's not in the report, I am happy that we were also able to answer some of the intimate questions that were asked by the family of those that were killed.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, after months of investigation, Congressman Trey Gowdy's Select Committee on what happened in Benghazi has issued its final report. And as you heard the congressman say, read it for yourself and determine whether there is new information in that. Brett Baer, the host of Special Report, has been digesting some of it. Obviously, it's an 800-page report. We've not had time to get into it all, Brett, but there are some, shall we say, groundbreaking bits of new information in there that we hadn't heard previous till now.
Well, that's right, John, and it is very detailed, and we have posted it, and people can read it on their own to go through it. But as we go through it, and as you hear this press conference, you can hear a couple of things that are very new that we are just learning about. One is this deputies meeting that happens at 7:30 the night of the attack. And in that meeting, the highest ranking official inside is Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. There are 10 action items from the report that come out of this meeting that lasts roughly an hour and a half to 2 hours. 5 of the 10 deal with the video, the Islamic video, and the characterization of the video and how the messaging about the video is going to come out. The other action items, we don't have specific granularity on yet, but one element is that military members are told to change uniforms in case they are going to go into Libya so that we are not seen as the U.S. invading Libya. And there is concern and talk in that call about interacting with the Libyan government to make sure that there is nothing that is out of bounds as far as the Libyan government is concerned. Now understand, at this moment, Ambassador Stevens is still missing. The attack is still going on. And 7 hours after Leon Panetta, the Secretary of Defense, orders the military to do everything it can to move assets to rescue the people still on the ground, not one, according to Trey Gowdy and this committee, not one wheel was moving in the U.S. military towards Benghazi.
Yeah. Democrats on the committee have issued their own report. They essentially say that nothing could have been done to save the lives of those 4 Americans. The first question that Trey Gowdy was asked after the initial news conference today suggested that there was nothing new in this report. I want to play, Brett, for our viewers, his response to that question.
You didn't know about any of the emails from Ambassador Stevens. You didn't know about any of the emails from Sidney Blumenthal to whomever he was emailing. You didn't know that a single U.S. military asset did not meet a single designated timeline. Think about that for a second. The world's most powerful military did not meet a single solitary self-imposed timeline. So all of that is new.
So there are things that could have been done, but again, the one of the chief conclusions that we heard today was that there were no military assets rolling in any way to rescue those people.
They didn't move. They didn't try.
Yeah.
They didn't mobilize. They didn't. Despite the order to go, something happened. And what that something is, I think there are a lot of people that wanted that answer. They wanted the specific quote. They wanted one person. It's a very detailed report, as we talked about many times with this attack, that there are three parts. There's the before, the security, lacking security before, that was really, everyone who looked at it said it was atrocious. One person called it a suicide mission at that CIA annex. Then you have the attack itself and what happened in reaction to it, and when they knew that the attack was, in their words, over, even though as the team was escaping the compound where Ambassador Stevens was, they were under attack all the way to the CIA annex. And then the third part is the post story. And that is the whole talking points. That is Susan Rice on the 5 Sunday talk shows. And you just heard Chairman Gowdy say that that was not based on talking points, that he claims that Susan Rice's comments on those 5 Sunday talk shows were, in his words, made up from whole cloth. So you see these three parts playing out in detail in this 800-page report. By the way, Chairman Gowdy will be on special report tonight at 6 p.m.
That is going to be fascinating to see. Jay Carney was the White House press secretary at the time. 1 week after the attack on the Benghazi compound, he said this.
I'm saying that based on the information that our initial information, and that includes all information, we saw no evidence to back up claims by others that this was a pre-planned or premeditated attack. That we saw evidence that it was sparked by the reaction to this video. And that is what we know thus far, based on the evidence, concrete evidence, not supposition, concrete evidence that we have thus far.
A week later, Jay Carney is still saying that it was all about this anti-Mohammed video. Hillary Clinton sent an email to her daughter Chelsea that night, while the attacks were essentially still underway, saying that it was an attack.
No, that's right. You know, a lot of the people around Benghazi in the administration, Democrats talking about this attack, and in retrospect say this was at the beginning all about the fog of war. What this report appears to show is that the fog was created here in Washington. It was crystal clear on the ground and up the chain from the people there, and they were in direct contact with people in Washington. But the fog was created in Washington by analysts who relied on press reports instead of eyewitness accounts on the ground. And that is all detailed inside this report.
Special report tonight with Chairman Gowdy is going to be fascinating. Brett Baer, the host of that program, we'll see you tonight. Thank you, Brett.
Thanks, John.
Live interview with Chairman Kurt Gowdy of that House Select Committee on what happened in Benghazi. That's coming up later tonight. Special report. Also, a bit later on, we're going to have Congressman Javier Becerra, Democrat of California. He is the chairman of the Democratic Caucus, a possible vice presidential pick for Hillary Clinton. We will share his thoughts with you just ahead. Now I want to bring in A.B. Stoddard, associate editor and columnist for The Hill. Colleen McCain Nelson is White House correspondent for The Wall Street Journal. Welcome to both of you. I wanted to read a headline from The Wall Street Journal, the website, AB. It says, House Benghazi report finds no new evidence of wrongdoing by Hillary Clinton. Is that accurate?
Well, I think that what we've learned, the revelations from this report show that there's going to be some serious questions, continuing questions raised about her judgment, her competence, and her sense of accountability and her honesty. And as you just mentioned in the lead-in, she actually did email her own daughter that night and refer to it as a terrorist attack, and then go on to talk about this video with the families who had lost those 4 men. So it's going to be a damaging episode for her in this campaign to have this report released and digested by the public. The question becomes, there are 2 questions I have. One is, can Donald Trump stay on that message of a good anti-Hillary Clinton message and be disciplined enough to remain on it? And then the number 2 question I have is whether her honesty numbers, which are so dreadful, could even get even worse. Perhaps it's not possible, but we'll be watching in the weeks to come.
Colleen, we know that when the caskets of those victims came home, Hillary Clinton was on the ground telling family members that, we're going to get the people who were responsible for this video. But if she's telling her own daughter on the night of the attacks that this was an Al-Qaeda-like attack, that seems like a lie.
Well, that's certainly something that she's going to have to answer to voters. And so this is not what she wants to be talking about at this point, and this raises a whole host of new questions. The report, as you noted, provides a lot of new context, a lot of new details about precisely what happened. The report doesn't substantially change the overall storyline. It doesn't lay fault directly at the feet of just Hillary Clinton. It's more of a broad rebuke of the Obama administration, but Hillary Clinton certainly is included in that rebuke, and she has been long trying to put this behind her, talk about other things on the campaign trail, and every day that she's talking about a Benghazi report is a day that is lost for her campaign. And so these are questions she's going to be facing from Donald Trump, from voters, and from interview journalists such as ourselves.
All right, AB and Colleen, stick around. We're going to take a quick break. We want to get your reaction to some new poll numbers on Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump and Hillary's weakness when it comes to the trustworthiness issue. All of this is wrapped up together. We'll be back with our guests in just a moment.